They said the ocean was lucky that night. Its reflection danced across the ballroom windows, glimmering against the chandeliers like liquid diamonds. Everyone looked beautiful. Everyone but me. I wasn't supposed to draw attention, not tonight, not in my black dress, not standing at the edge of my sister's perfect fairy tale. Lily had always been the chosen one. The golden child. The daughter who could do no wrong. And when she got engaged to Adam Harrison, the man with money, influence, and charm, polished enough to blind you, my parents saw their second chance at greatness. I saw my last mistake. Because when the bills started piling up, when the designer demanded $50,000 for that gown she couldn't live without, I was the one who paid. Quietly. Without question. That's what family does, right? But families lie, families take, families decide who belongs and who doesn't. When the band struck its first note, the entire room turned toward the stage. My father took the microphone, his voice thick with pride and champagne. He raised his glass, beaming beneath the chandeliers that glowed like ice. "We're so proud of our only daughter," he said. The applause was thunder, the laughter deafening. I didn't move, couldn't. The air left my lungs as if someone had pulled the floor out from under me. And in that moment, under all the glitter, music, and lies, I realized the truth. That night I didn't just lose my family. I discovered what they'd been hiding from me all along. The chandeliers above the ballroom glittered like frost, catching every flicker of light from the ocean beyond the glass doors. 200 guests filled the hall of the Harbor View Hotel, their laughter blending with the hum of a live jazz band. The air smelled of sea salt perfume and expensive champagne. My sister Lily stood in the center of it all, glowing in a silk gown that cost $50,000, her smile rehearsed to perfection. I stood near the back, close enough to hear, but far enough to be forgotten. My black dress felt wrong among the sequins and silver. Dad Michael Grant held a glass of champagne and smiled as the host handed him the microphone. The band softened, the crowd turned toward him. "We're so proud of our only daughter," he said, his voice thick with pride and wine. Applause erupted. The words hit harder than I expected, a clean strike to the ribs. Mom Grace Grant rested her hand on his arm and smiled toward Lily, the perfect picture of elegance. For a moment I waited for her to correct him, to glance at me, to acknowledge there was another daughter standing in the shadows. She didn't. The cameraman swept across the room, catching Lily's tears. My parents embraced, the crowd cheering. For a second his lens met my eyes. I froze, the smile on my lips slipping before I could stop it. Somewhere online, people watching the live stream would later ask who the woman in black was, the one who didn't clap. I set my glass down. The bubbles had gone flat. My heels clicked softly against the marble as I slipped out to the terrace. Outside, the Atlantic wind cut through my hair, cool and sharp. The moon hung over the bay like a coin tossed in water. Behind me, through the glass doors, I could still hear the band starting up again, another toast, another round of laughter. I leaned on the railing, trying to breathe. The night smelled of salt and roses, of something expensive and empty. "You did this to yourself," I whispered. "You said yes to every request. You paid for her dress, you fixed their bills, you showed up. And they still erased you." The phone buzzed in my clutch. A new message. Camden Bank. Subject line: property title transfer. Effective today. My thumb hesitated before I opened it. The screen lit up with the familiar address, 1180 Lighthouse Drive. The house I'd helped my parents pay off after Dad's construction firm nearly went under. The home where we celebrated every Christmas, where Lily learned to play piano, where I once painted the living room, while Mom dictated which shade of white looked more respectable. Beneficiary: Lily Grant Harrison. Effective date: October 7th, the date of the wedding. I stared at it until the words blurred. The waves below hit the rocks in steady rhythm, matching the pounding in my chest. A laugh escaped my throat, small and hollow. It startled even me. So that's how it was going to be. The same day they stood in front of 200 guests and erased me from their story, they erased me from the deed too. The terrace door opened behind me. I turned, half hoping it was Mom. Instead, it was Tom, one of Dad's old business partners, his face red from the champagne. "Emily," he said, "didn't see you in there. Shouldn't you be celebrating your sister's big day?" I forced a smile. I was. He laughed, oblivious, then glanced toward the ballroom. "Quite a family your parents have built. Lily's husband seems like a smart man. Tech startup money, right?" "Something like that." Tom raised his glass, nodded, and walked away. I watched him rejoin the glowing crowd inside, disappearing into the blur of sequins and music. My hands trembled not from anger yet, but from something colder. I opened my email again just to be sure it was real. Every word was clear, every signature official. The house was gone. My name erased. A year ago, Dad had asked for help when a project in Portland collapsed. I wired $20,000 to cover payroll, then another 15. When Mom said they needed more time, I didn't argue. Family, she'd said, is about loyalty, not balance sheets. Now I understood what loyalty meant in this family. It meant silence while someone else signed the papers. I took off my heels and stepped onto the cold tiles, my bare feet numbing against the stone. The ocean wind whipped the hem of my dress around my legs. Inside, a new song began, something slow and romantic. Lily and her husband were probably dancing under the chandelier, surrounded by people who called them beautiful and blessed. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, I watched the reflections in the glass doors. Lily spinning Mom, applauding Dad beaming, and me outside a faint shadow behind the glitter. My phone vibrated again. This time it was a message from an unknown number. No words. Just an image of the lighthouse house taken from the street earlier that evening. A single caption, "Congratulations." A chill crawled up my spine. I locked the phone and slipped it back into my clutch. I turned toward the ocean and let the sound of the waves drown the music behind me. For years I had tried to prove I belonged, that being the responsible one was enough. I paid their debts, carried their secrets, and built the stability they bragged about. But as I stood there under the cold moonlight, I felt something shift. Maybe losing everything was the only way to see clearly. From inside, someone called Lily's name over the microphone. Another cheer erupted. The word family echoed through the glass like a taunt. I looked at the shimmering water, the endless black horizon stretching out before me, and whispered so softly no one could hear, "That family doesn't exist anymore." The wind swallowed my words, carrying them out over the sea. Then I turned, lifted my head, and walked away from the ballroom lights, leaving the applause behind me. The next morning, the world looked bleached and brittle, as if the wind off the Atlantic had scraped away all its color. I checked out of the hotel without breakfast. The clerk smiled politely, probably assuming I was another hungover bridesmaid. I didn't bother correcting him. The road back to Boston stretched ahead in a blur of autumn trees and morning fog. My hands clutched the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Every few miles, the same thought pulsed behind my eyes. They didn't just forget me. They deleted me. The radio murmured somewhere between static and soft rock. I turned it off. Silence felt safer. When the ocean disappeared from the passenger window, I finally exhaled. The tears came fast, then stopped just as suddenly, leaving my throat raw. By the time I reached my apartment in Back Bay, the city was quiet, half awake under a gray sky. I kicked off my shoes and stood in the middle of my living room, still smelling of salt and perfume from the night before. On the coffee table sat a wooden box, small and worn, carved with initials, E.M. Eleanor Morgan, my grandmother. She'd given it to me on my 21st birthday and said something I hadn't understood then. "If you ever stop recognizing yourself, this will remind you who you are." I sat down and lifted the lid. Inside lay a folded piece of stationery yellowed with age and a small silver key. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the letter. The handwriting was my grandmother's, sharp, elegant, deliberate. "All that I have built," she had written, "including the house on Lighthouse Drive, belongs to my granddaughter, Emily Grant. Use it with honesty, not pride. File this with the court when the time comes." My breath caught. A date in the corner told me she'd written it the year before she died. At the bottom was a faded stamp from a notary office in Camden. I turned the key over in my hand, remembering how my father once said the safety box at Camden Bank had been closed years ago because it was empty. Empty. I laughed quietly. Maybe not. The box also held a small USB drive taped to the underside of the lid. I plugged it into my laptop, half expecting it to be blank. Instead, folders opened photos, receipts, scanned letters. At the top was a document titled Estate Draft. It matched the letter, the same property description, the same signature, the same name, mine. For a moment, the room spun. If this document was real, my parents had hidden it from probate court after she died. They'd told me there was no will, that everything had been sold to cover medical costs. I believed them. I paid half those bills. I walked to the window, looking out at the wet street below. Delivery trucks rolled past. People walked their dogs. The world kept going like nothing had happened. My world, though, had tilted. I poured coffee with shaking hands and opened my old family email account. Dad had given me access years ago when I handled the company's invoices. It hadn't been used since they locked me out. I reset the password, half expecting it to fail, but it opened. Thousands of archived messages filled the screen. Scrolling through them felt like picking at a wound. There were messages between Dad and his partners at Grant Builders, others between Mom and vendors. But then, a new thread caught my eye. Transfers labeled Project Renewal, dated just a month ago. Amounts in the tens of thousands. Recipients included Lydia Harrison and something called HL Consulting. I clicked open one email. Attached was a signed transfer approval from my father's company account, authorized by both my parents. Lydia's name appeared as a secondary account holder. The signature line under mine was blank. I whispered it aloud. They used her to move the money. The coffee had gone cold, but I drank it anyway. My phone buzzed with a text from a friend asking how the wedding was. I typed a reply, deleted it, then tossed the phone aside. I opened another file, this one an old ledger from 6 months ago, showing a loan of $180,000 secured by the lighthouse property. The collateral description made my stomach twist. The house had been mortgaged again, even though it was already paid off. The realization settled like a stone. The wedding wasn't just a celebration. It was camouflage. A perfect stage to shift everything into Lily's name before the bank came asking questions. I tried to think logically, like the consultant I was at work. Who benefited most from this? My parents were drowning in debt, but someone had to orchestrate it. Someone who understood timing, property law, and how to make a transfer look legitimate. My thoughts went to Lily's new husband, Adam, tech entrepreneur, investor in emerging markets. I'd shaken his hand only twice. The first time, he'd looked at me like he already knew everything about me. The second time, at the rehearsal dinner, he'd smiled and said, "Families are built on trust." His tone had made it sound like a warning. I went back to the letter from my grandmother, rereading the words until they blurred. Use it with honesty, not pride. File this with the court when the time comes. Maybe that time was now. The silver key still rested in my palm. It was small, old-fashioned, with the number 27 etched at the top. I checked Camden Bank's website, searching the location of their safe deposit division. It was still active. I hesitated, then packed the letter and drive into a folder. The drive could be evidence, the letter proof of intent. Outside, the rain had started again, fine and persistent. I grabbed my coat and keys. The elevator ride felt endless, my heart matching its slow hum. By the time I reached my car, the sky had turned the color of pewter. I sat behind the wheel, engine running, windshield wipers slicing through rain. Across the street, 2 men stood under a coffee shop awning watching the traffic. One of them looked vaguely familiar. Dad's accountant, maybe. When I glanced again, they were gone. I tried to shake it off. Paranoia didn't help. But as I pulled out into the street, the same black sedan from the wedding lot appeared 2 cars behind me, its headlights low in the mist. It followed for 3 blocks before turning off toward the highway. When I reached the first toll booth, I exhaled and forced myself to focus. The plan was simple: go to Camden, open the deposit box, confirm the will, then figure out what came next. The rain thickened into a steady curtain. My grandmother's letter lay on the passenger seat, the ink beginning to blur where a few drops had fallen. I tightened my grip on the wheel and whispered to the empty car, more to steady myself than anything else. I'm not invisible anymore. The words hung in the air, soft but certain, as the gray highway carried me south toward the truth waiting in Camden. By the time I reached Camden, the rain had thinned to mist. The old town looked almost the same as I remembered: quiet trimmed hedges, weathered porches facing the sea, but the air felt heavier now, like it carried the weight of secrets. The lighthouse house sat at the end of the street, its white shutters gleaming under a washed-out sky. The just married sign was still hanging on the porch rail, flapping weakly in the wind. My heart pounded as I parked across the street. For a long moment, I just sat there watching the lights glow through the curtains. I had spent half my life in that house, sanding furniture with Dad in the garage, listening to Mom hum while she cooked. It used to feel like belonging. Now it felt like a crime scene. I walked up the path. Laughter floated through the front windows, brittle and false. My hand trembled as I rang the bell. It was Dad who opened the door, his face flushed from wine. "Emily," he said, surprise melting into discomfort. "What are you doing here? We need to talk." Inside the living room was a blur of perfume, leftover champagne, and congratulatory flowers. Lily was there barefoot, her dress replaced by a cream sweater. She froze when she saw me. Mom appeared from the dining room, still composed, a hostess, even in confrontation. I pulled my laptop from my bag and set it on the table. The PDF of the property transfer glowed on the screen. "Why is my name gone from the deed?" I asked. Dad sighed, rubbing his temples. "Let's not do this tonight. It's already done. The house is in Lily's name." Mom folded her arms. "You have a good job in Boston, your own apartment, your independence. Lily needs a stable home. She's starting a family." I stared at her. "So that's the trade? Stability for honesty. Don't dramatize," she said, her tone clipped. "This is what's best for everyone but me." Dad's jaw tightened. "You've always been fine on your own, Em. Not everyone is built like you." Lily spoke softly, almost pleading. "I didn't know they were changing the papers until after. It's temporary, I swear. Temporary, like being erased from a toast." Her face reddened. "You're making this ugly." I looked at Mom. "What about Grandma's will? The one she gave you before she died?" Her eyes flickered just for a second. Then she said, "Don't dig up the past. So, there is a will." She didn't answer. The silence stretched until I couldn't breathe. I closed the laptop, picked up my bag, and turned for the door. Dad called after me, but his voice was soft, unsure. Outside, the air hit my face, cold and sharp. The drive back to Boston blurred into gray highway and fogged windows. I replayed every word, every look. By the time I reached my apartment, exhaustion had replaced anger. I dropped my bag by the couch and checked the mail stacked on the counter. Bills, flyers, and one small FedEx envelope with no sender. The handwriting on the label was unfamiliar, but something about it made my stomach twist. I sliced it open. Inside was a single USB drive. No note, nothing else. For a moment, I thought it might be from Grandma's old lawyer, or maybe someone from the bank. I plugged it into my laptop. The folder that opened was dated 4 years ago, labeled Grant Builders. Inside was a video file, grainy security footage from the office workshop. I pressed play. The image showed the conference room. Mom sat across from a man I recognized instantly, Adam Harrison, Lily's father-in-law, founder of Harrison Development Group. My father's supposed business savior. The sound was muffled, but their voices were clear enough. "The losses need to disappear before the next audit," Adam was saying. "Move the property assets under Lydia's name. New paperwork, new mortgage. It'll look like a wedding gift." Mom nodded. "Michael can handle the signatures. Emily won't question it. She never does." I felt my stomach drop. Adam continued low and calm. "Once the deed is transferred, we can settle the company's debt quietly. No headlines. The auditors will think it was a personal decision. And the house Mom asked, will it still be ours?" "Technically, yes. On paper, Lydia owns it. In practice, you do. Everyone wins. Everyone except me. The video ended there, the screen fading to black. I sat back, my pulse loud in my ears. The file had a timestamp, a date from the month before Grandma died. They'd been planning it even then. I played it again, forcing myself to watch without looking away. Every gesture of my mother's, every quiet nod, was a nail sealing the truth. The phone rang, making me jump. "Unknown number," I answered. "Emily Grant," a woman's voice said. "This is Karen from Camden Bank's audit department. I understand you've been inquiring about safe deposit access connected to Eleanor Morgan's estate." "Yes," I said carefully. "Why, we noticed an irregular withdrawal from that box 2 weeks after her passing. No record of what was removed, but the signature on the form matched your mother's." I swallowed hard. "Did you keep a copy?" "We did. I can email it to you, but I'll need identification verification first." "Of course." When the call ended, I sat staring at the laptop screen, the paused frame of my mother's face still visible. The realization sank deep. They hadn't just hidden the will, they'd built an entire cover story around it. The rain started again, outside, soft against the window. I saved the video, uploaded a copy to a private cloud, and shut the laptop. The apartment felt too quiet, too clean. I glanced at the FedEx envelope on the counter, its inside flap marked with faint fingerprints. Whoever sent it had known exactly what they were doing. I leaned back in my chair, breathing slowly. Somewhere in that chain of signatures and shell companies, there was a plan bigger than a family betrayal. Someone was pulling the strings, and my parents were only part of it. The computer pinged with a new email. It was from Karen at Camden Bank. The attachment opened to a scanned form dated May 17th, 5 years ago. The signature line read, "Grace Grant." Below it, handwritten in ink that bled slightly through the paper, was a single note: "Asset retrieval approved by A. Harrison." I stared at it until my vision blurred. The screen glowed faintly in the darkening room. The rain had turned to a steady roar, tapping against the glass like a pulse. Outside, somewhere down the street, a car engine idled. I turned off the light, heart pounding. For a few seconds, I stood still, waiting for the sound to fade. When it finally did, I let out the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I'd keep being the daughter who cleaned up after everyone else. But now I had proof. And I wasn't done. I shut the laptop, placed the USB back in the envelope, and sat quietly until the city outside blurred into streaks of rain and headlights. In that stillness, the shape of the next step began to form, cold, precise, inevitable. The next morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean, but cold. I didn't sleep. I kept replaying the video in my head, my mother's voice, Adam's measured tone, their calm betrayal. The proof was solid, but I needed someone who knew how to use it. By noon, I sat in a corner booth at a cafe near the courthouse. My coffee had gone untouched. Across from me, a man in his late 30s walked in tall, sharp suit, no wedding ring. David Sullivan. He used to handle corporate compliance for my father's firm before leaving 3 years ago. Rumor said he quit after a fallout over creative accounting. He spotted me and hesitated before sitting down. His handshake was firm, but wary. "You didn't mention details on the phone," he said. "What's this about?" I opened my laptop and slid it toward him. The property deed, the email chain, the video, all there. I watched his face as he scrolled. His calm expression shifted, his jaw tightening. "This is bad," he murmured. "These signatures, they're forged. Whoever did this knew what they were doing." I leaned forward. "Can you prove it?" He tapped the document. "The notary, Victor Langley, has been under investigation twice for document fraud. I testified in one of his hearings. He got off on a technicality. If he stamped this, it's compromised." He scrolled further, frowning at the timestamps. "Where did you get the video?" "It came anonymously, likely from someone in my father's company." He nodded slowly, calculating. If Lydia's name was added as co-owner and Adam Harrison guaranteed the mortgage, this could be a laundering setup. The money moves through her, the company debt disappears. On paper, it looks like a wedding gift. Exactly what I thought. David sat back thinking. His voice dropped. Do you realize what you're touching? This isn't just family fraud. It's corporate-level concealment. I exhaled steady. Then I need to make it visible. He looked at me for a long moment. You'll need documentation, financial trails, emails from the bank. I can help collect them, but quietly. We spent the next hour mapping steps. David outlined what I'd need: verification from Camden Bank, the estate letter, and statements from Grant Builders last fiscal year. Every time he spoke, his tone stayed measured, detached, but something in his eyes betrayed unease. When the meeting ended, he gathered the papers and said, I'll start digging on Langley. Meet me in 2 days. We stepped outside. The street was busy with office workers heading back from lunch. David glanced around before lowering his voice. If this goes public, Adam won't hesitate to bury it. He's connected. Be careful who you trust. I nodded, trying to read his face. Then I noticed a black sedan idling at the curb. The same make, same tinted windows. My pulse jumped. David followed my gaze. You know that car? It's been around. Since the wedding. He frowned, scanning the street. Then he said quietly, Get in your car and drive somewhere crowded. Call me if it follows. I tried to smile, but my voice came out thin. You sound paranoid. In this business, paranoia keeps you breathing, he replied. I left the cafe, pretending calm. When I merged onto Boylston Street, I checked the mirror. The sedan turned too. I forced myself to keep driving, weaving through traffic, until I reached a shopping plaza. After circling once, I parked near the entrance. The sedan slowed at the light, then turned away. Back in the car, my hands shook. The city suddenly felt smaller, its noise too sharp. I called David. It's gone. Good, he said. Whoever they are, they're watching for movement. Don't go home tonight, stay somewhere else. I ended the call, staring at my reflection in the window. The face looking back at me didn't feel like mine anymore, harder, sharper. By evening, I checked into a downtown hotel under a friend's name. The room smelled faintly of bleach and detergent. I locked the door, pulled the curtains tight, and set my laptop on the desk. Emails from Camden Bank flooded in automatic replies, confirmations of account access denied. But one stood out marked private. It was from Karen, the audit officer. She'd attached scanned ledgers and wrote, I don't know what's happening, but your father's company's assets were moved under personal family transfer by Harrison Group. Be cautious. My chest tightened. I saved the file, encrypted it, and backed it up twice. The glow of the screen reflected off the window, catching movement outside. A figure stood by a streetlight smoking. I couldn't see his face, but the stance felt deliberate, waiting. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. No message. Then another buzz, this time with text. Stop digging, Miss Grant. We clean what we must. My blood went cold. I backed away from the window, heart hammering. For a long time, I didn't move. I waited, counting the seconds, until the figure outside flicked the cigarette away and walked off into the dark. I sat on the edge of the bed, gripping the phone. The words replayed in my head, colder each time. Whoever we was, they weren't bluffing. I opened the drawer, pulled out the letter from Grandma, and placed it beside the laptop. Her handwriting, steady and calm, looked almost like defiance. I let my fingers rest on it. They think they can scare me quiet, I whispered. Outside, sirens wailed faintly in the distance. The city's pulse went on indifferent. I pulled the curtain tighter and sank onto the floor, my back against the bed frame. The night stretched long. Between the hum of the air conditioner and the faint drip from the bathroom faucet, I could hear my heartbeat, steady and stubborn. If justice had a price, I thought I was already paying it. And tomorrow, I'd pay more. Morning came with a dull light pressing through the hotel curtains. I hadn't slept more than an hour, my body caught between fear and exhaustion. The phone buzzed at 8. David's name flashed across the screen. He said he had arranged a meeting. The notary who handled the deed, Victor Langley, was willing to talk. His voice carried that quiet tension lawyers use when they already expect bad news. "We can meet him this afternoon at his office in Quincy," he said. "Bring everything you have." By the time I reached the cafe where we planned to meet, the city felt sharper, every sound too loud, every stranger a threat. David was waiting outside, coat collar turned up, a folder tucked under his arm. He greeted me with a nod instead of a smile. Langley arrived 20 minutes late. He was in his 50s, pale and tired, smelling faintly of gin and paper. The office he rented was above a pawn shop, its blinds half closed against the sun. He locked the door behind us. "I could lose my license for this," he muttered, before sitting down. Then he glanced at the documents I'd spread across the table. "You're Emily Grant, right?" I nodded. He rubbed his forehead. "I remember that name. Your father brought the paperwork for the transfer himself, said it was routine." "Was my mother there?" I asked. He hesitated. "She knew. She always knew." David leaned forward, voice even. "Did you sign off on it personally?" Langley swallowed his hand, trembling slightly. "I was paid $15,000 in cash to validate signatures that weren't made in my presence. I didn't ask questions." "Who paid you?" Langley's eyes flicked toward me, then to David. "Adam Harrison. Said it was a family favor, nothing illegal." The room went still. I could hear the faint hum of a fridge from the hallway. David asked, "Why talk now?" Langley looked older suddenly. "Because someone came by my house last week, asked if I still had copies of those files, told me to destroy them." He paused. "I think they mean to make this all disappear." I felt my pulse in my ears. "Did they threaten you?" He gave a dry laugh. "Not directly. They don't need to. I've seen what happens to people who cross them. We left soon after promising confidentiality." Outside, David walked fast, his shoulders tight. He didn't speak until we reached the parking lot. "He's terrified," I said. "He should be," David replied. "This is bigger than I thought. Harrison's company has government contracts. If he's laundering through family names, this won't stay private for long." He stopped walking and looked at me. "You trust me, right?" I hesitated. "I did once." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You think I'm involved?" I met his eyes. "You audited Harrison Group last year. I found your name on the report." "That was before I quit," he said quietly. "Before I realized how deep they were in. I left because they wanted me to falsify numbers. I wanted to believe him, but the timing felt too perfect." He seemed to sense it. "If you don't trust me," he said, "keep copies somewhere else. Don't give me everything." I nodded, pretending to agree. That night, I returned to my apartment, double-locked the door, and uploaded every file to an encrypted cloud drive under a fake name. The process took hours. I saved 3 backups, printed nothing. When it finished, I sat back exhausted, but certain I'd finally secured what mattered. The city outside was quiet, the hum of traffic fading to a low buzz. I tried to rest, but each time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's signature on those papers, her hand moving as if signing away a stranger's life. Sometime past midnight, I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating. A new email had arrived from the cloud service. I opened it, still half asleep. All files deleted. Activity completed at 11:37 p.m. My stomach dropped. I logged in again. The folders were empty. Every document, every video, every scan gone. I checked the backup drive. Empty. I stared at the message history scrolling until I found it. Delete means safety. A cold rush went through me. The phrase wasn't random. It matched the text I'd received after the meeting with David. Someone had accessed the system from inside with credentials strong enough to bypass encryption. I ran a hand through my hair, pacing the living room. My chest felt tight, panic clawing at reason. If they could wipe my data, they could do more. I called David. He answered on the second ring, voice groggy. "Emily." "They deleted everything. Every file I saved." He was silent for a moment. "How?" "Someone had internal access." "It wasn't random. You didn't share your login with anyone." "No one. Not even you." He exhaled slowly. "Then they're inside your network. Stop using your accounts. I'll set up a physical backup tomorrow. The line crackled, his tone low. And, Emily, if they reached your data, they know you've been watching them. After we hung up, I turned off my phone and unplugged the router. The silence felt heavier than before, pressing in from every direction. I sat on the floor back against the wall, trying to breathe through the panic. Somewhere below, a car door slammed. I crept to the window. A white van idled under the streetlight, its windows tinted dark. After a minute, it pulled away, tires hissing against the wet pavement. I closed the blinds, the image burned into my mind. The files were gone, but not everything was lost. The USB still sat in the drawer, the one from the anonymous FedEx. They hadn't found that. Not yet. I took it out, held it between my fingers. My reflection in the metal looked foreign, tired, harder, less afraid. The cracks were showing not just in the plan, but in the people I thought I could trust. And somewhere inside that fracture, something dangerous was starting to grow. It started with a phone call from my aunt. She said my mother wanted to make peace. The words sounded rehearsed, like she had practiced them before dialing. She invited me to dinner at her lake house in Bangor that weekend. Everyone will be there, she said softly. It's time we sit down like family. I almost said no, but curiosity won over anger. If they wanted a reconciliation, they would have to face what they had done. I told her I'd come. The lake shimmered silver under a pale evening sky when I arrived. The house smelled of cedar and roasted meat, an attempt at warmth that felt false. My mother greeted me at the door with a tight smile. My father stood behind her, older, somehow shoulders bent. Lily appeared from the kitchen, cheeks flushed, trying too hard. "We all know why we're here," Aunt Carol said, forcing a cheerful tone. "Let's eat before the food gets cold." The dining room overlooked the water, the kind of view magazines loved, yet the air felt heavier than the clouds above the lake. No one spoke as we sat down. Adam Harrison broke the silence first, pouring wine into crystal glasses. "To family," he said smoothly, lifting his glass. My father nodded weakly. My mother sipped without looking at me. Lily tried to start small talk about the weather in Boston, about my job, about anything that wasn't real. I answered politely, every word measured. Adam leaned back, smiling. "I heard you've been asking a lot of questions, Emily. That's a habit that can get people into trouble." I met his gaze. "Only if they have something to hide." He chuckled, the sound low, dismissive. "You've misunderstood how business works. Families help each other. Sometimes lines blur." Across the table, my mother shifted. Her fork clinked against the plate. I saw her fingers tighten around the stem of her wine glass. My father stayed silent, staring at his food. I glanced toward the living room where my bag rested on the couch. Inside was my laptop. The backup drive. The clip I hadn't shown anyone yet. I wiped my hands on a napkin and stood. My mother frowned. "Emily, sit down. Let's not turn this into something ugly." "It's already ugly," I said quietly. "You just don't want to look at it." I went to the living room, opened my laptop, and waited for it to boot. My heartbeat matched the hum of the machine. I walked back to the dining table, turned the screen toward them, and pressed play. The room filled with static, then voices. My mother's voice, Adam's voice, the recording from the old security feed. "We can't risk Langley talking," Adam was saying. "Pay him again or silence him. You said he wouldn't talk." My mother replied, "If he opens his mouth, this entire plan falls apart. Then make sure he doesn't." The air in the room froze. The sound of clinking silverware stopped. My mother's face went pale. My father stared at the screen as if it were something alive. Lily's breath caught her hand, covering her mouth. "Where did you get that?" Adam barked, pushing his chair back. "From a system you thought was erased," I said. "This is a setup," he snapped. His voice rose, echoing off the high ceiling. "You edited this. You're framing us." David stepped out from the hallway. He had arrived earlier at my request, waiting in the background until the moment came. He placed a folder on the table. "The Department of Financial Compliance will decide what's real," he said evenly. "That's a subpoena for your company's ledgers, Mr. Harrison." Adam's jaw tightened. My father looked between them, his voice trembling. "Adam, tell me this isn't true." Adam smirked, almost pitying. You wanted to save your company, Michael. I gave you away. Don't act surprised because your daughter doesn't understand business. That was the breaking point. My father's hand shook as he rose from his chair. You used my family's name to launder your debt. You used us. Adam shrugged, reaching for his coat. The system uses everyone. David moved toward him. Sit down, Adam. Adam's eyes flicked toward me, cold and deliberate. You have no idea what you've started, he said softly. Then he brushed past David and walked out the front door, slamming behind him. The silence that followed was heavy, almost unbearable. My mother looked small for the first time, her confidence stripped away. Lily cried quietly, her mascara running down her cheeks. My father sank back into his chair, his face ashen. I closed the laptop. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint lap of the lake outside against the dock. David gathered the documents, his expression unreadable. I'll take this to the investigators in Augusta tonight. Don't leave town, he told my parents. They'll want statements. He turned to me as he left. Be careful on your way back. I nodded, though my throat felt too tight to answer. When the door closed behind him, my mother finally whispered, Emily, what have you done? What you were too afraid to, I said. I walked past her and stepped out onto the porch. The air smelled of rain and pine. Across the water, the last light of sunset caught the waves in dull gold. For the first time in months, the weight on my chest felt lighter, but only slightly. From the driveway, a voice called softly, You really don't know what you've unleashed. Adam stood by his car, his face shadowed by the dark. His tone wasn't angry. It was almost calm, like a teacher scolding a student. I met his eyes. Maybe it's time someone did. He smiled faintly, not amused. Then he opened his car door and said, Careful now. The people I work with don't forgive mistakes. The taillights flared red as he drove off into the dark road that wound along the lake. I stood there until the sound of the engine faded into nothing. The night was still, the air colder. Behind me, the house was silent, except for the soft sobs of my sister. The truth was out now, but the danger was just beginning. A week passed in a blur of headlines and police tape. The investigation spread fast once David handed over the recording and the subpoenaed files. News anchors called it the Harrison scandal. Every channel replayed the same image of Adam's company building with flashing lights outside. His accounts were frozen within days, and he vanished before anyone could question him. My father called the morning after the warrants were issued. His voice was weaker than I remembered. He said he was cooperating with the investigators. They wanted him to testify about the transactions, about Adam's involvement, about Mom. She knows more than she's telling you, he said. So does Adam. There are things in the company books that even I didn't see. You need to leave Maine for a while, I told him. He laughed softly. It's too late for that. The line went quiet, except for his shallow breathing. Then he said, Promise me if something happens, don't let them bury the truth. The next morning I got a call from the Camden police. My father had been found unconscious in his garage. The words blurred together. Carbon monoxide exposure, possible heart failure, no sign of forced entry. He died before the ambulance reached the hospital. I drove to Maine without thinking. The house was already taped off when I arrived. The detectives were methodical, polite. One of them, a woman named Lopez, handed me a pair of gloves and led me inside. We found a locked safe behind the workbench in the garage, she said. His attorney confirmed it belonged to your father. You're listed as an emergency contact. The combination was written on a scrap of paper in his wallet. I turned the dial slowly, each click echoing louder than the last. Inside were old invoices, an envelope of cash, and a flash drive sealed in plastic. I handed it to Lopez. She plugged it into her laptop. Lines of emails filled the screen. The top message made my breath catch. It was from my mother to Adam. Erase Emily from the estate before the auditors arrive. Handle her the way we discussed. Lopez frowned. This could be evidence of coercion. Coercion, I said. It sounds like a plan. She glanced at me, her expression unreadable. We'll need to verify the metadata. For now, keep your phone close. If we find anything else, I'll call. I spent that night in a motel near the coast. The air smelled of salt and damp wood. My father's words kept replaying in my head. Don't let them bury the truth. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number appeared. Meet at the lighthouse house tonight, or you'll never hear the truth. My first thought was that it had to be a trap. My second was that I had already lost too much to ignore it. I packed the flash drive, left a message for David, and drove through the fog toward the coast. The town was asleep when I reached Lighthouse Drive. The house loomed ahead dark except for one faint light upstairs. I parked a block away and walked the rest of the distance. My shoes crunched on gravel loud in the stillness. Inside, the front door was unlocked. I pushed it open slowly. The air smelled of dust and old perfume. A floorboard creaked from the kitchen. Emily, a voice whispered. Lily stepped out from the shadows wearing a sweatshirt and jeans, her hair pulled into a knot. Her face was pale. "What are you doing here?" I asked. She shook her head. "Adam told me to come. He said he'd explain everything." "Where is he gone?" "He called an hour ago, said he was leaving the country, that he had papers proving the rest of us were guilty if we didn't help him." I stared at her, trying to read her expression. "Did you know about Dad?" Her voice broke. "I swear I didn't. He only told me to sign things, said it was to protect the company. Then he said if I didn't, he'd ruin Mom and me both." The sound of an engine echoed from outside, low and slow. Headlights swept across the walls through the window. Lily froze. "That's his car." I motioned for her to stay back and peered through the curtains. Adam's black sedan rolled to a stop in the driveway. He stepped out, adjusting his coat, scanning the house like he already knew we were inside. My phone vibrated again. A new text. "You shouldn't have come alone." The front door creaked as it swung wider. Adam's silhouette filled the entryway, calm, deliberate. He looked at me first, then at Lily, behind me. "You never did learn when to quit," he said. I didn't move. "You killed my father." He smiled faintly. "Your father was weak. He couldn't handle the pressure." Lily's voice cracked. "You said you loved me." He didn't even turn to her. I said what I needed to. For a moment, no one spoke. The wind howled through the open door, carrying the smell of rain and gasoline. Then Adam glanced toward the window, where distant red and blue lights flickered faintly against the fog. "You called them, didn't you?" he said. I met his gaze. They were already on their way. His expression shifted, something like respect, then resignation. He turned toward the door, his voice low. "You think this ends with me? It doesn't." He stepped outside, disappearing into the night. Lily sagged against the wall, sobbing. I stood still, my heart pounding, waiting for the sirens to get closer. When the police arrived minutes later, the driveway was empty. Adam's car had vanished. Only the smell of exhaust hung in the air. The detective shined a flashlight over the wet ground, shaking her head. "He's gone." I looked back at the house, at the dark windows reflecting the flashing lights. Somewhere behind those walls, my family's secrets were still hiding. The storm had finally broken, but the real reckoning hadn't even begun. 2 months later, the courthouse in Portland buzzed with reporters and the faint hum of television cameras. I stood on the steps, the cold February air biting through my coat, watching the convoy of black SUVs pull up. Adam Harrison was led out in cuffs, his tan replaced by the gray pallor of a man who had finally run out of power. The headlines called it the biggest financial scandal in Maine's history. To me, it was simply the end of a long lie. Inside the courtroom, the fluorescent lights felt merciless. The prosecution laid out the evidence methodically: the forged signatures, the fraudulent transfers, the hidden accounts tied to shell companies in the Caymans. Each exhibit pulled another thread from the web Adam had spun. My mother sat at the defense table, pale, her hands clasped tightly together. Lily sat behind her, avoiding my eyes. When it was my turn to testify, the room went quiet. I walked to the stand, the click of my heels echoing in the silence. My voice was steady as I recounted how the deception began, how the house I helped pay for became the vessel for money laundering. How my father died, trying to fix what others had destroyed. I didn't cry. I refused to give them that. The defense tried to paint me as vindictive, a bitter daughter seeking revenge. The judge cut them off. The truth once exposed no longer needed my defense. It spoke for itself. Adam showed no remorse. When the verdict came, he looked directly at me, his expression unreadable. The judge sentenced him to 10 years in federal prison and ordered restitution to the victims of his fraud. My mother was fined heavily and given 3 years of supervised release. Lily, who had testified under oath, received immunity in exchange for cooperation. She wouldn't look at me when she left the courtroom. After the gavel fell, I stayed seated while the others filed out. The sound of footsteps faded, leaving only the faint rustle of papers and the hum of the ceiling lights. David approached quietly, setting a folder on the bench beside me. "It's over," he said. I shook my head. "No, it's finished. That's not the same thing." He nodded once, understanding. "You did what most people couldn't. You faced them." I didn't reply. Instead, I picked up the folder he'd left. It contained the final closure documents for my father's estate signed by the court. The house on Lighthouse Drive officially returned to my name. I folded it carefully and slipped it into my bag. The weeks after the trial blurred together. Reporters called constantly. Strangers sent letters of sympathy. Some called me brave. Others called me ungrateful. None of them understood what it felt like to dismantle the only home you ever knew, just to uncover what was rotting inside it. A year passed before I returned to the coast. Spring had softened the air, and the seagrass swayed along the dunes. The Lighthouse house had been sold to pay legal fees, but I didn't need it anymore. I had already built something new. The Whitmore Foundation for Truth opened quietly in a converted library on the outskirts of Boston. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. The first donations came from women who had lost everything to deceit, manipulation, or silence. Each story felt like a mirror, painful but familiar. On the morning of our opening, a courier delivered an envelope with no return address. Inside was a short letter, typed on heavy paper. For the daughter I was too afraid to defend. "I'm sorry it took losing everything for you to find your voice." The signature was my father's. I stood by the window for a long time, holding the letter against the sunlight. Outside, volunteers set up chairs and a banner in soft blue. David was there, helping with the equipment sleeves rolled up. He caught my eye through the glass and smiled, small but genuine. Later during the ceremony, I spoke briefly. Not about revenge or forgiveness, but about truth. I told the audience that justice wasn't about punishment. It was about acknowledgement, about refusing to disappear quietly. I looked out over the crowd, faces turned toward me, some nodding, some wiping away tears, and I finally understood what my grandmother had meant when she wrote, "Use it with honesty, not pride." When the applause faded, I stepped outside. The wind off the Atlantic carried the scent of salt and freedom. I walked down to the water shoes sinking into the damp sand and looked at the horizon. The sea was calm again, wide and endless. They erased me to protect their name. I rebuilt mine from the truth. The waves rolled in, erasing my footprints almost as soon as they formed. For the first time, I didn't mind. The past could go. The future finally belonged to me. And if you've ever felt invisible inside your own family, if you've ever been told to keep quiet when the truth burned inside you, remember this: silence doesn't save you. Truth does.